and that kind of ties back in with the Nevada Pinyon Juniper Partnership. And I'm not going to go into that a lot today, but the work I'm going to present was specific to their conference last December, and I've been told that I have some QA, QC in the front row with fruit ready to go if I don't do a good job here today. But again, my name is Jeremy Drew. I'm with Resource Concepts, Inc., who is a private consulting firm that was lucky enough to get some technical work with the Pinyon Juniper Partnership. And I'm not necessarily a utilization guy, but I did stay at the University Inn last night, so I'm feeling pretty good about things. What I'll discuss and what we did for the PJ Partnership is we developed a demonstration area, and I'm going to talk about that just briefly to kind of set things up. And then I'm going to go through how we located the demonstration area within Nevada as requested by the PJ Partnership, and it'll give you a sense of some of the PJ issues we're dealing with statewide. And I'm going to just step through the data gathering and analysis we did, some of the management agency planning and projects and where they're at in the state of Nevada, and a little bit of a focus on identifying areas in need of treatment and that we're ready for action, which is really what we were looking for. And then I want to talk a little bit about attempting to achieve some specific goals in the demonstration area. If we have time, we'll get into some of the potential for biomass utilization in that demonstration area and some conclusions. And you'll notice throughout this, excuse me, that some of my pictures are about 30 years old. And I did this on purpose. In Nevada, this is not a new issue. We've been working on this a long time, but I think we've got a synergy and a lot of folks interested in a common goal and a common challenge. And there's a lot of excitement in addressing that. So the purpose of the demonstration area, really what we were looking for is to designate a location where funding, agency operations, professional expertise, and a private-public partnership could focus on restoring ecosystem health and resilience, not only of the PJ type, but also the sagebrush ecosystems. Here was our starting point. And if you look at the state of Nevada, we have estimates put it between 9.2 and 10 million acres of PJ distribution on, as was mentioned yesterday, 83% being public lands. And you can see the land distribution primarily. This peach color is BLM. The light green shades are the tracts of Forest Service land, and the PJ is kind of the charcoal color. So this was our starting point. What we wanted to do is look at both the federal and the state side in our data gathering and see where the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service were in terms of PJ projects and PJ issues, and also see what the state had to say both through the Department of Wildlife and the Division of Forestry. If you take a look at the BLM Management Units in Nevada, we've got some huge planning districts throughout Nevada. And almost every one of them has PJ to some degree. The only two being Winnemucca, which is pretty limited in the PJ distributions they have, and the Southern Nevada or Las Vegas office. So we actually sent questionnaires out to each office and asked them to identify areas that they felt were in need of some sort of PJ restoration or PJ work. And we had a few areas pop up on the western side of the state through the Carson City office that identified areas that they'd like to go in and work on, but haven't necessarily had money to start the planning process. And those areas are identified in green on the map. And you'll see a few of them throughout the state, in the central part of the state. The yellow areas are areas that have been identified and have started some pre-planning process. So they've actually gone to the field and started developing site-specific data that will be rolled into an EA or an EIS. And then you'll see on the eastern side of the state, you've got an entire district, and this would be the Ely BLM district, that basically has entered their entire district into a planning process. And the way they have done this is through their resource management plan. And the way they're tackling this is through a watershed evaluation process. So they're taking watershed scales at a time, and some of them haven't begun planning. Some of them were in the pre-planning phase where they're gathering site-specific information. Some of them were out in an EIS process, and some have actually completed EAs or EISs, and we're actually seeing some implementation of PJ projects. In terms of Humboldt-Toyabe National Forest, you can see there's a lot of different management units. Nearly every unit does have PJ to some extent. And you'll see the previous map, and it's hard hard to see, but they did establish a 5-year plan in terms of what they wanted to do in terms of restoration of PJ. A lot of that focused on fire, and the reason for that is most of the Forest Service lands are on higher, steeper elevations, where really fire is the only management tool that they feel is viable. But they did have some mechanical projects listed, and you'll see primarily the Ely District had a lot of those projects planned, and a lot of this was in the wildland-urban interface around Ely, Nevada. And also the Tonopah and Austin districts in the center of the state had a small degree of mechanical treatments that they were in the process of planning or implementing. We also went to the State Department of Wildlife, and we looked at 2 specific documents. One was Nevada's Wildlife Action Plan, and the other, and I'm sure you've heard of this cute little animal, is the greater sage grouse and the conservation plan that they've put together for Nevada and Eastern California. And right out of the sage grouse plan, it talks about, they looked at factors affecting sage grouse and habitat and addressed those at the population management or local area. So we knew we had some good local inputs when we were looking at this plan. One of the risk factors they identified, and very rightly so, was habitat quality, habitat quantity, and some of the effects both wildfire and PJ encroachment have had on the sage grouse. And this is right in line with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's determination in terms of the listing, and what they said one of the major threat factors were one of the top 2 was the loss of habitat. And one of the things they identified as far as actions to improve habitat quality included such things as mechanical treatment of pinyon and juniper. So what we did is mapped out each of the planning management units, and what you're seeing in red are all the PMUs where PJ encroachment was identified as a primary factor of concern in terms of habitat. I don't want to say degradation, but was posing some habitat issues. Orange were moderate levels of impacts, and excuse me, yellow were a little bit less important in terms of PJ being a risk factor to habitat. So again, you'll see out here in the Ely District, again, we've got a lot of risk factors associated with sage grouse habitat. You also see that in the central part of the state and obviously along the western boundary. We also looked at the State Wildlife Action Plan, which doesn't focus solely on a single species like the sage grouse. It focuses on a whole suite of species. And what they did in the action plan is they developed conservation strategies for different key habitats. And this is right out of the plan for lower montane woodlands. Again, we talk about maintenance of mixed montane shrublands and grass forb understory components, maintenance of full range of multi-age stands for PJ and juniper savanna, increased vigor, diversity, productivity of PJ stands, reduce areas of pinyon juniper invaded landscapes. This is their wording, not mine. And one of the actions, specific actions, is design of a scientific-based PJ management strategy that maintains sufficient high-quality wildlife habitat while responsibly reclaiming lands from PJ, what they call invasion. Again, this really gets to the core of what the PJ partnership is about, is where is restoration needed, how can we best accomplish that goal. And if you take a look, these are some of the areas that the state action plan mapped in terms of needing to be addressed for the lower montane ecosystems. Again, it almost overlaps the sage grouse maps perfectly. We've got some areas in the western side of the state, obviously some huge mountain ranges here in the central part of the state, and then over in eastern Nevada again. Of course, if you talk Nevada, you're going to talk sagebrush. Again, one of the objectives is to reduce the loss of sagebrush to PJ encroachment, and they had a goal of 2015. And again, there's specific action through coordinated resource planning. I think it gets right back to the concept of collaboration. Design a science-based management strategy that responsibly reclaims sagebrush. I mean, this is stuff that I was able to pirate from reports that were already done that fit perfectly with the goals and objectives of the Nevada PJ partnership. Again, if you look at the mapping, it almost perfectly overlays what we've been talking about again, and pretty soon you're seeing a trend. And that trend is that you have multiple resource values being addressed or in need of being addressed in the same areas. We also looked at the Nevada Division of Forestry, and this was convenient because they had completed a statewide resource assessment in 2010, and also a partner document with that was their natural resource strategy, also prepared in 2010. What their assessment identified was priority forest landscapes and threats to Nevada's natural resources. And the nice thing about this is that the analysis was conducted on priority landscapes across all ownerships. And in terms of the state resource assessment, that rolled right into this strategy. And what they were looking at is providing a long-term, comprehensive, coordinated plan for investing state, federal, and leveraged partnership resources to address management and landscape priorities identified in the assessment. So again, it's right in line with the goals and objectives of the PJ partnership. And I'm not going to step through a lot of this, but these are the different factors, and basically their assessment and priority was done through a GIS exercise, and they used all these different factors, everything from impaired watersheds to stewardship potential to riparian areas, threatened species, wildland-urban interfaces. So they did a very comprehensive job, and again, it was across all land ownerships. And you'll see this is the map that was produced by the resource assessment. In the areas in red were those areas that met multiple of their criteria, and what they did from that is develop their resource strategy, and these gray polygons that you see are the areas where they're interested in focusing their priorities, leveraging their partnerships, and working across both state and federal agencies to get some things accomplished. Again, you see a lot in the western side of the state. Some of the central portion of the state fell out for different reasons that I won't necessarily dive into. But again, we have some huge tracts of land out here in eastern Nevada in the PJ type that are identified as a resource strategy as priority landscapes. So when we looked at selecting a demonstration area where we could pool our resources in some sort of a statewide triage approach, we ID'd areas with an ecological need for treatment of PJ, and that was for a multitude of values, whether it's watershed health, wildlife habitat, ecosystem health and resilience, and fuels, of course, is a big one that we've talked about at this conference. We wanted to ID areas that were ready for action, or at least in the planning pipeline, at a landscape level. We wanted to maximize the potential for multiple positive resource outcomes from that landscape treatment, and we wanted to maximize the potential for partnerships and funding opportunities. When you looked at those and you broke it down by those BLM districts that I showed earlier in the presentation, the Ely Ranger District for the Forest Service and the Ely BLM District basically met all of our criteria in all the areas that we looked at. And that's not to say that there's not important issues to be addressed in some of these other districts as well. They just weren't necessarily as far along in some of their planning process and implementation process. So if you look at that demonstration area that I talked about in that Ely district on the eastern side of the state, and you look specifically at their RMP and some of the data that they've gathered, you can see that there's some huge acreages of pinyon juniper type and also sagebrush type. This figure straight out of the RMP talks about sagebrush communities where pinyon and juniper are increasing on BLM administered lands. And you can see it's this dark gray color or hatch, and it's pretty much prevalent throughout the district. And that doesn't include a large tract of land where no data was available. This analysis that they conducted was based on NRCS ecological site descriptions. This area wasn't complete at the time of the planning process. It is now. So they have that data gathered and collected for going forward. With that in mind, with that data gap in mind, if you looked at the sagebrush type that they identified in the district, they showed a tree state or an expansion of pinyon and juniper into the sagebrush type. They estimated their current state or acres at nearly 1 million acres. Their target goal for the RMP, which dictates management for the next 20 years, is much less than that, right around 250,000 acres. If you take a look at some of their PJ type, and you'll remember it was somewhere along the magnitude of 3.5 or 6 million acres, they classified the PJ into a herbaceous state, immature woodland, mature woodland, over-mature woodland, and an invasive phase. You'll see that their over-mature woodland phase is almost near 3 million acres. And their desired state, again, in the next 20 years is much less than that. So essentially they're wanting to take this column with some form of treatment and move it back into the mature and immature woodland phases. So the other thing that we looked at with these things in mind is ID areas where there was the potential for utilization to play a role in enhancing some of the restoration treatments. As you can see, we had some huge acres that we were dealing with, and at treatment levels of $500 to $1,000 an acre, we definitely need some help in achieving those goals. So what we identified are two potential utilization hubs, and this was more to encourage a discussion of the PJ partnership going forward. But one was around Ely, Nevada, which is here on the north end of our demonstration project. And again, this is the Ely BLM District. There's some Forest Service tracks mixed in through the Ely Ranger District. And we also looked at the town of Pioche as a second hub. What we did is we took their PJ distribution mapping and we trimmed out areas that were in wilderness or wilderness study area. We trimmed out areas that had burned in the last 20 years, and we trimmed out areas that were in excess of 30% slope, just to get a sense of the magnitude of PJ that may be harvestable through mechanical means. And if you take a look at it, we broke these down into 10-mile radiuses. So here's 10 miles. Within 10 miles of Ely, you had 54,000 acres of the PJ type that were potentially harvestable. And if you start getting out to 50-mile radiuses, you're looking at 750,000 acres. Pioche was very near that, and you'll notice that our analysis zone did not overlap into Utah, and there's significant PJ distributions on the Utah side of the line as well. I'll apologize to Lance for not looking at that. So what we did is just ran a hypothetical. Hypothetically, what we looked at, and I told you I wasn't a utilization or a biomass guy, but I know people who are. And the hypothetical we ran was for a 10-megawatt biomass power facility. And the reason we picked this is that it fit in with some of the co-ops in that area who provide electricity in both Lincoln and White Pine counties. And this is something that they could absorb on their local grid without requiring a whole lot of expansive new transmission lines. But a 10-megawatt biomass power facility or combined heat and power facility would require around 67,000 bone-dry tons of biomass per year. In talking with some of the folks in the Ely BLM district, their restoration of phase 2 and 3 woodlands in the Ely district have been generating anywhere between 5 and 11 bone-dry tons per acre. Now that's not to say we'd go out and clear cut. These treatments were a combination of maybe clear cutting where they were wanting to remove the trees from a sage-grouse or a sagebrush type, or a mosaic patch in a PJ woodland, or even some thinning either in a PJ woodland or around urban interface areas. So if we assume conservatively at 5 bone-dry tons per acre that's generated from this restoration project in overmature PJ woodlands, we need to restore approximately 13,000 acres a year to operate the plant. And if we operated the plant for 20 years, we'd be looking at about 260,000 acres of PJ treated. That basically boils down to only 35% of that harvestable acreage around either Ely or Pioche. So again, we talk about this, the difference between what the current state is, current condition in the Ely RMP, and the desired state, and you're looking at a difference of 2.73 million acres that they're going to attempt over the next 20 years, and actually we're down to about 15 years, to move from this overmature phase into these other woodland phases. If we look at that rate of 13,000 acres per year, it would take us 210 years to achieve that desired range of conditions. Now again, that's assuming that we're only looking at the utilization side. That doesn't assume or take into consideration other factors such as fire, which would probably be used in those areas that were greater than 30% slope. So I guess the bottom line is here, with or without utilization as a component of this, we have a lot of work to do. Just some quick conclusions, and these are conclusions that I presented at the PJ summit that we had in Las Vegas in December. The area is in need of PJ restoration treatment for multiple values. It is ready for action at a landscape level. In fact, the Ely BLM district has moved forward in their watershed planning, and I think they're on the verge of releasing an EIS for up to about 60,000 acres of mechanical treatment in the PJ type. But that doesn't mean that they have the funds for implementation of those recommendations ready. This area provided a great opportunity for partnerships between the federal agencies, but also the state and it also maximized the potential for funding opportunities with all the money floating around through NRCS for sage-grouse, farm bill programs, and some of the programs that were discussed yesterday. Again, there were multiple opportunities for potential utilization. We just looked at one. The extent to which utilization could lower the cost of restoration treatments is going to be dependent on multiple economic factors specific to the utilization types. And I think the bottom line, and something that the PJ partnership in Nevada has really recognized and acknowledged, is that all PJ projects must be dictated by the need for restoration and in conformance with all agency planning documents, policies, and regulations. We're not looking at doing something that's not sustainable or doesn't meet those restoration goals. That concludes my presentation, but I'm more than willing to answer questions. And if you're concerned about or want any of this information, you're more than welcome to visit the Nevada PJ Partnership website or email me directly. But all of the presentations and the information and the mapping presented in this report is available at the website.
Thank you, Jeremy. We have time for questions. Sir?
Tell me again what was limiting you to the 13,000 acres a year. That's all the grid could absorb.
Yeah, what we looked at in terms of the 10 megawatt is the professional that we had who's built biomass power facilities in several states actually went and talked with the local co-ops, both in White Pine and Lincoln County. And what they indicated is that 10 megawatts was what they could absorb onto their local grid without needing some serious upgrades in terms of their electronic grid.
It almost makes more sense to ask them to increase their capacity because two things. You have a more dire need than 13,000 acres a year, and anybody that builds power plants is going to be reluctant to build such a small one
Sure.
because they achieve no economy of scale for less than 20 or 25.
Right, and that was understood going in. We were looking at a baseline condition, like I said, to start discussions from. So we weren't necessarily doing an economic feasibility analysis for a company. We're establishing a baseline hypothetical that we could have, start these discussions from, and I think it did that really well at the conference.
Angela?
Just a comment on that, I guess. With only 5 tons per acre of material, though, you'd be reaching out a heck of a long ways if you got too big. And so there is a lot of diminishing returns with the size of those plants. I understand the economics of wanting to go bigger with the equipment investment, but once you get out too far, you're spending a lot of money just getting material into that. Right? So there's a balance there that you need to look at. And also, typically we look at 10 megawatts or less because of the permanent provisions, because if we're under that threshold, there are some avoided costs that if you can meet the avoided costs, there's some advantages to getting into the market.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with all that. And these are discussions that we had in December, and obviously it presents some challenges going forward, but really our job was to spur the discussion. We've already done that here today, so goal accomplished at least in that regard.
Jeremy, with this kind of assessment and looking at the fact of the acreage and the actual service industry that exists or should exist to help support this, what kind of insights you're seeing? It takes time to grow a service industry.
Yeah, and that's one of the bigger challenges that we have. There's a couple challenges, and I think the previous speakers have hit on them. One is keeping a reliable supply for any industry, whether it's a power plant, whether it's a pellet manufacturing plant. Really, the only industry in that area that I described right now is firewood. That's the primary industry. And what the BLM folks are telling us, and the other one I'll mention is fuels for schools, because I know that's going to be discussed later. The school in Ely has all the fuel it can ever handle. And what the BLM folks are telling us is it's starting to become a hindrance to issue stewardship contracts because there's no place to put the material. So really, we're dealing with a big challenge in Nevada in terms of trying to build some sort of industry or some sort of commercial base as an outlet for those stewardship contracts when they come through. They've got, and I can't remember the tonnage, but there's an excess of 10 tons of chips sitting in at least a couple different locations in the Ely district because they've been proactive in achieving some of their restoration. So absolutely, one of the biggest challenges we face in Nevada is developing some sort of industry that could handle that biomass.
So is there any discussion with the governor and others at appropriate levels to fuel that?
Some of that has started. What the PJ Partnership has done is they have developed or established a legislative committee to start having those discussions. I think we're about 18 months into the process, and as we talked, the collaboration is obviously a lot of laboring, and we've been doing a lot of laboring, but that's kind of where things are going, is discussions with both the local communities and the state communities and even some of our federal representatives as to how we can start building some of these industries. Absolutely.
Any more questions for Jeremy? Go ahead, Roy.
I noticed on your maps, of course, you stop at the Nevada and Utah line, and there's a lot of strategies for watershed restoration and treatments now working across all watersheds.
Absolutely.
And there's all these state lines. Your partnership considering doing that, going beyond the Nevada border?
Absolutely. Those are discussions that we've had, and I think that's part of the reason that I was asked to come here today, is to start exploring those partnerships across state lines. The other thing that I should point out that throws kind of a curve in this whole thing is when you look at the Ely District, that's kind of the headwaters. Some of those watersheds are the headwaters of Lake Mead and southern Nevada's water supply. But also they're looking at developing a large-scale water development project and program from that part of the world. So when you start talking about watersheds, clean water, things like that, it really ratchets up the importance of those sorts of things and values.
Time for one more?
Maybe just one plug. Doug Martin, who is the co-chair for the PJ Partnership, will be talking a little bit more about the PJ Partnership and the collaboration section this afternoon, and we'll talk about how it's organized and some of the things that the partnership is working on to implement some of the challenges that Jeremy just described.
So, thank you.